It wasn't a mere fact of, and then people would say, oh, you're doing it, why are you starving yourself? This isn't right. So it's like every aspect of the religion is being falsified, and then going back and checking it, we're like, you know what? It actually goes in accordance to how a person should live. So I would say we're leaning more towards the side of questioning religion as opposed to just believing it. That's why you see a country like the UK that was majority Christian becoming more secular liberal. Why? Because those values are being questioned more. Why? Because those textual sources, like you're telling us to commit to the Bible. Why? Who wrote it? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Okay, where did they get? Were they alive at the time of Jesus? No, they weren't alive at the time of Jesus. Okay, what connects them to Jesus? Do you have a chain of narration? No, you don't have a chain of narration. Then that opens up a question, back and forth. And then a person goes, okay, then what about Islam? What do they say? Oh, Islam claims that they have a chain of narration. How does that work? So if there's a saying by the Prophet Muhammad, we say, peace be upon him, we say that, okay, we heard it from this person, who heard it from that person, who heard it from that person. We know every single person in that chain. Every single person in that chain, we know about their name, their family, their tribe. We know how truthful and trustworthy they were. We know about how, competent they were. So that criteria makes that more stronger. Do you see?
Yeah, completely. But
so, yeah.
I think those things are very interesting historically. And I think, the historical facts around how the Bible emerged, how the Quran emerged, and how it was passed down, and the kind of the philology behind that, the word shows about language and society and culture that those texts emerge from. It's really interesting historically, but like from a theological point, like I'm not religious, so I guess like I find that interesting as well. But I don't think I'm ever gonna be convinced by sort of rational argument to.
That's actually interesting because
I'm saying I think it's non-rational.
Interesting. That's fine because.
Sorry, what I mean there is I'm not saying what you're saying is non-rational. I'm saying my belief in that isn't a rational one. It's a reflection of it's a reflection of factors that I haven't been able to control, like my upbringing, the beliefs of my parents, the beliefs of my community that I've inherited and absorbed without really thinking about it. And the idea, I think, in the end, you can do as much of the research and the critical thinking as you want. I'm not going to change my views. I don't think someone who thinks the alternative is going to change their views. But you can obviously you can have a discourse about it, and that's really helpful. And I find it fascinating, and I'm really interested in what you're talking about. But I think I'm never going to be convinced by rational argument, because I think my belief system hasn't been arrived at rationally. It is just something that I've inherited, like my DNA.
That's interesting. However, do you think that there is maybe an argument?
No, completely.
That maybe you haven't heard, or maybe there is an upbringing that maybe unconsciously, Freudianly, that you have maybe adopted, that maybe can be undone. Like
people can change their mind.
That's what I want to get across to you, John. Never close the door.
No.
Maybe in the future, or maybe later on in the conversation, you could hear something. If you've closed the door, what you're in essence saying is that I've heard all the arguments, I found them unconvincing, which is obviously not the case, because maybe there is an argument, maybe there is a way, maybe there is a situation. For example, even though you don't look at it, they say people post the age of 25, you do pretty much become set in your ways psychologically. However, there are a few things that can change that. For example, affirmations and trauma. Where death of a loved one, heartbreak, that makes you question existence. Especially, it depends how badly you've been heartbroken. It makes you question a lot of things, like what's the point? What's the point of it all? What am I doing here? And because you just follow along, and then it's a pain that you're feeling that you've never felt before. And then for some people, they describe it as, I find it hard to breathe. It's like a grey cloud that follows me. So that's that aspect as well. However, the mere fact that you said I was brought up a Christian, but now I've kind of gone away from that. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's more, you're kind of saying agnosticism, that I hold the Christian values, but I can't say for certain what it is.
I mean, I wouldn't say I was brought up Christian. Like, none of my family believe in God. I've never been to church. I'm saying that I think that to live in Britain is to be massively influenced by Christian value systems and morality. And I think, secular is a Christian concept. I think it's impossible to. I would say like a militant atheist like Richard Dawkins is as evangelically religious in his atheism as the most passionate puritanical American Bible Belt Christian. I think in the end, Richard Dawkins pretends that he is, basing it all on reason, and the other side are basing it on emotion or kind of superstition or faith. I think Richard Dawkins is as much a man of faith in his atheism as a fervently religious person is in their faith.
I don't think you'd be happy to hear that.
No, but I don't know. He definitely wouldn't be. He would disagree with me. But I think what I'm saying is, like you said it there about trauma changing your perspective.
I agree with you, by the way.
Yeah, but that I think that I completely agree with you, and I think that proves my point. Trauma isn't a rational thing. Trauma is a deeply emotional thing, and people's views change and people adopt their values not on rational reasons.
It's ironic because you've heard of Richard Dawkins. You probably know Christopher Hitchens as well.
Yeah.
So Christopher Hitchens' brother Peter Hitchens, he accepted religion, and somebody asked him, "What's the evidence?" What evidence? And he kind of echoed your sentiment as well to a degree. He said it's not necessarily the evidence that I'm going to posit to you because it's subjective. To each their own. To different people, it's different forms of evidence that resonates with them. And you're right, one of those things might actually be emotional. It might be at that particular moment in time, I adopted this particular theology and it gave me a religious experience or whatnot. I would argue, of course, that's not enough, that you do need rationality, a degree of rationality. Yes, there is belief, there is rationality, and you're right, there is emotion as well. However, just let me know what you think about this. Well, one of the argument is called the argument from contingency. This is quite popular, but let me know what you think about this. So it pretty much states that we're dependent beings. Everything that you see around you, the microphone, your bike, your phone. It's all dependent. You're dependent on something else. That's dependent on something else. That's dependent on something else. Infinite of dependent beings.
Sorry, guys. Okay, step down.
Argument that Leibniz, Aristotle, and all these guys, even Richard Dawkins, to a degree, accepts. But he just says, and he posits at the end of that chain, he believes it could be an alien, could be anything else. But as believers, we say the end to that chain, necessarily and logically, it doesn't make sense that it's an alien because the alien itself would be dependent. So the irrationality of dependency would be like, if I'm about to pass you the baton of honor. So for me to pass it to you, before I pass it to you, I have to ask his permission. Then he has to ask his permission. He has to ask his permission. If it goes on ad infinitum, I wouldn't get to pass it on to you because the chain is still going on. There has to be an end to that chain, and then for them to respond by saying, stop, yes, you can. Yes, you can, yes, you can, yes, you can. And then, only then, I can pass it on to you, and then you have the bottle. So my argument is the mere fact that we exist, the baton of you, the mere fact that we exist means that there was an end to that chain. Now the argument or the points are, what's the rationality about the necessary being? Some believe that being left people, created people and just left it. However, I posit that there needs to be certain logical things that being needs to have. For example, because it's the first in the chain, has to be independent, has to have will, has to have power, has to have intelligence, and those things I would posit is God. That's the definition of God. So rationally it makes sense. But John, how would you say emotionally? How would a person emotionally believe in something other than say their culture? Let's just say they're brought up like Tarzan, the Jews in the jungle, in the middle of nowhere. Would you argue that person that's brought up in a jungle in the middle of nowhere on a desert island, would they believe in a higher power?
I don't even think they'd be capable of language, and therefore they wouldn't have the best of anything.
But they would.
If they're in a community, then maybe yes.
He's giving you the baton of honor now.
They wouldn't. it might be that they develop their own kind of explanations for the world, their own kind of belief system, which we might want to call, in a way, a kind of religion. But I think, I'm not saying they would at all think like Christian things or anything like that. What I'm saying is I think that things that we take to be in this country to be universal and thought of by everyone actually turn out to be highly contingent and relative to the culture and the ideas that we've inherited from our ancestors in this country and the kind of historical events that happened to this country that have made it what it is today, which could have been otherwise. I don't think they're at all necessary. I think it's an accident that we believe.
So, a child that's born in a jungle or a forest somewhere, do you believe that person is just going to? Do you believe that they're just going to? Do you believe
his answer? Could you answer that, please? Because I'd like to know that.
Do you believe that person's going to believe in a higher power?
Possibly they could do. They might look at the sun and think, this is giving me light and warmth, and therefore they might have that kind of idea that.
Do you believe it's innate?
I think there is. I think whatever we want to call it, there is a human desire to know the answer and to have a system of beliefs. But I think that can manifest itself in religion, or in like your beliefs in politics or your moral system. So I would say an ardent communist is just as religious as an ardent Christian. Communists even have their own saints and holy books.
Wow.
Like the Protestant, the Das Kapital and all sort of work of Marx and Engels
Special pleading is called.
Is looked at in the same way as a Christian would look at the Bible. So I think all cultures have religions, even if they claim to be secular. And what I'm saying is the way you arrive at those belief systems is completely dependent on your upbringing and factors out of your control. So I think the arguments you're giving about, why to believe in Islamic theology, for example, I find really interesting. But I think that for me they're more interesting because it tells us about the culture
where it's rooted from,
of 12th century Saudi Arabia, it tells you about the society that produced those ideas. And I think that's why I find Christian thoughts interesting as well, because I think it's historically informative about the society that those ideas emerged from. But in terms of the actual engaging with whether it's true or not, I find that less interesting, and I don't think I'm going to change my views, and I don't think anyone can really change their views on the basis of rational argument.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, remember I mentioned this point. I said that if that was the case, then you wouldn't get mass conversions to
I'm definitely not saying people don't change their minds.
Yeah,
for sure.
And in order to change your mind, you need like a degree of rationality. You need a degree of rationalism, argumentation, evidence to some degree.
I think it's just as likely, if not more likely, that you change your mind, as you say, because you use trauma in your life, or because of a profound experience, like the divine, or like some kind of emotional event that has resonance with you. I think that has far more impact on people's worldviews than pouring over evidence.
I think when you talk about evidence, it's interesting because some evidence can be regarded as rational evidence. Some evidence could even be regarded as emotional evidence. Could even be logical evidence that's actually subjective. Let me give you an example. For example, even if you look around you, you see that a tree once upon a time was a seed. Yeah, you put water on it and you just observe it for a long period of time, and it becomes something that's such grandiose and majestic as this giant tree that we see in front of us. When we see the sun, the way it powers itself, and you see the symmetry of a bird, we'll appreciate, say, a canvas that paints a butterfly. We'll appreciate a canvas that paints a mandarin duck. However, when we see a mandarin duck, we'll say, if I was to ask you, how did that occur, according to you? So how would you say, let's just say, even if you do say, okay, that's emotional, that's cultural, evidence, how would you, what answer would you give to the complexity and the design that we see around us, or even to your existence? How do you think it came about?
I think that's where we're going into a different kind of a different field. Like there we're really talking about, to be honest, things I don't find that interesting, like basically scientific questions. And like, you know.
But is it science though?
I mean, look, I'm not really a scientist. You know, I've not ever done much education beyond GCSE level in science. I don't find that interesting. I think like I've got no reason to not. I've got no reason to deny, like, you know, the classic scientific theories like Darwinism that explain evolution quite well, I think, or the existence of the natural world. And like, you know, I think I find those arguments convincing. I can completely see how somebody who was brought up in a different environment and had different ideas given to them when they were forming their view of the world would think differently. And I would not. And I think it almost gets to the stage where saying that one is right and one is wrong becomes a bit pointless. Like, okay, one really interesting example. So I'm sort of interested in history.
We'll come back to this point because it's a good point.
Yeah, we'll come back to it. But like, I think the historical event I'm really interested in is when Napoleon and the French army invaded Egypt in like the early 19th century, or late 18th, early 19th century, and he basically had probably the first time like Enlightenment, liberal secularism interacting with Islam. I think that's probably the first time in history that's happened. Like, you don't say Christianity and Islam interacting, you know, throughout the Middle Ages, but the French Revolution bringing in secular ideas and secular practices into politics, government, culture, the economy. I think the reason that's interesting is because there are, even though they believe different things, there are huge similarities in the types of beliefs that the liberal secular French had versus the Islamic mullahs in Egypt, and that is that they believe in a single truth, and they believe that anything that is inconsistent with that is wrong. So it's two like monistic ideas or monistic worldviews coming into interaction with each other and basically sort of clashing because one they can't both be true. And I think if you look at particularly modern day France with its kind of secular constitution and republican concepts around how society should be modelled, which is very anti-religion, and that's partly because they're rejecting their Catholic inheritance, but I think that is the position there. And then you've got Islam, which thinks completely differently, but how do these two belief systems interact in the same society? It's a really tough one, because in the end, they both are trying to convert the other person. I'm not saying they're actively trying to convert them, but I'm saying like in the end they think the other person's wrong. I agree with you. And I think in the abstract, like there's no point trying to work out which one's right and which one's wrong, because they're completely dependent on the unique, contingent social circumstances that emerge in both those societies over history, which have produced the belief system and the ideas and the cultural practices that those two communities have today.
That's actually a good point, and that's an argument, ironically, which I make as well, because I say what you're doing is you're measuring both of them using different yardsticks.
Yeah, exactly.
So we'll use the yardstick, of course, belief in God, whilst you will do it, i.e. the secular liberal would do it using their yardstick, which is subjectivism and what their founding fathers like John Locke and those individuals, what they put forward. So I agree with you there. But then in order to kind of make the conversation... it's yours. To make it... What's interesting then is that one can analyze the consistencies of what we're asking the other person, so the discussions can become more fruitful and more academic as opposed to you're right, you're wrong. It can come to that. However, you say that, okay, so if you're asking for beliefs when it comes to God and certain, we say, presuppositions or axioms, then why is it that as secular liberals, where's your grounding of objective morality? Like, where do you get it from? What's the evidence of your morality?
Well, this is my theory that we started talking about. I think that secular liberals, without realising it, have Christian values.
They do, because John Locke, I mean, he did, exactly. And then suddenly, like Henry VIII did, you separate church from state, and then you have this thing that was once attached to state. I agree with you, in fact. So that's why I think the argument or when a person is discussing, it's more on the person to talk about, okay, so this belief system has a God, that one doesn't. So then it is God. Then the discussion needs to be centered around God. Is there evidence pertaining? That's why so many philosophical questions and all that is pertaining God. But it's so interesting that when we said, look, how do we kind of conclude how we're here and design and intelligence and all that? You said it's interesting how you went to science, and let me know what you think about this. So science explains the how, religion explains the why. For example, if we see a cake, if a cake is baked and it's in my kitchen, I bring a scientist along and I say, using science, tell me why is that cake there? Yeah. Then he will start doing experiments, in a beaker and looking at the chemical composition and saying it's an exothermic reaction, blah 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 blah. I say fantastic, brilliant, thanks. But why? Why is it?
I agree.
Yeah, why is it baked? So that's why even Einstein said you can't answer moral questions or questions about.
I agree. And I think anyone who thinks, I think this is quite a common view. Anyone who thinks that the best and only explanation of everything is the scientific one hasn't really thought about it. I think that's an easy thing to fall back on. People think, science has in many ways replaced religion as the kind of main article of faith that people have in this country. To the extent, I'd say, actually, where you saw during the pandemic, I would say that epidemiologists and scientists had the status of priests back in the 15th century.
Wow.
An enormous amount of power because they're seen to be able to access this higher form of knowledge that the layperson can't. And I think, personally, that power was to some extent used during lockdown. In the same way that priests have used their power in the 15th century, because they had that position in society where they were trusted, because the belief system that people had that explains everything was back then Christian theology. Now it's science, what it lacks. So I think that goes back to my point, that it's all religious, really. Even though they don't believe in God, this is agreeing to your point. They still have this need to explain why, and this need to have a set of beliefs that are grounded in some sort of value judgment about why they believe that. And I think for the liberal rationalists, when they say, I believe in reason and I believe in the evidence, they're saying that in a way that is as religiously loaded as a Christian saying, I believe it because God is, because I trust God, or because I have those beliefs because I believe in divine revelation. I think they're the same argument, just expressed differently.
What's also interesting is, when it comes to evolution and Big Bang, these are mechanisms, or even forces like gravity. These are all mechanisms which are prescriptive and descriptive. How they describe, force describe motion, the bend in time and space, whatever you want to call it. I don't want to get too technical. However, no one ever says gravity created this, evolution created this, or Big Bang created this. It explains change over time, but it doesn't evidence or prove how that thing got started to begin with. And that's why, just to end the point, like Big Bang, evolution, forces, their mechanisms, and we believe God is a creator of mechanisms. So there becomes a category mistake when a person says that, evolution disproves God, Big Bang disproves God, because evolution, Georges Lemaitre, when they say that he laid the foundations for Big Bang, he was a Roman Catholic priest. Evolution, Charles Darwin, he didn't come up with God and then say, you know what, he came up with the theory of evolution, but he didn't discard God, saying I'm a disbeliever now. In fact, one of his friends, Asa Gray, he was a Christian. He didn't abandon his faith. He said, you know what, it's just a mechanism. And even with forces like gravity, when Newton came up with the force, he didn't say, he didn't come up with the force, but he theorized the force of gravity. He didn't say, I don't need God anymore.
He was deeply religious.
Yeah, Newton stayed religious, Georges Lemaitre stayed religious, Charles Darwin practically went, the furthest he went was agnosticism.
I agree. I think it's nonsense to say that science and religion are incompatible. Because I think they're talking about different things, as you say. I think a lot of it is about language as well, the way we talk about things. So take a non-religious example of the scientific and a non-scientific explanation. Take a piece of music. like the scientific explanation for why that is pleasurable to hear a piece of music is to say these certain sound waves are interacting with my nervous system to create a pleasure hormone. Like that is an explanation, and that probably does capture what's going on a scientific level, but you're not really saying anything about the music. Just as good an explanation is it's a beautiful piece of music that soars on a melody line and then comes down in a mournful manner. Like that explanation isn't scientific, but it's still talking about the music. It's giving a description that is, I'd say, more valuable. And I think you can make the same analogy to talking about what you're saying about science and religion. And I definitely think that the two of them are interacting on different levels and not talking about the same thing.
There's a quote attributed to Einstein. I don't know how authentic it is, but he says something along the lines of religion without science is blind, and science without religion is lame. So, kind of.
I agree with that.
The both need to kind of go together, and we're seeing deeply religious figures of the past, like even Islamic kind of theologians and scientists, like Khwarizmi, Kindi, Ibn al-Haytham. So all these individuals, they still stay true to their faith, and even like when Europe was going through the Dark Ages, we were going through the Golden Ages of science and discovery and the like. So, and what's interesting about what you said as well is that when you distill everything down to just materialism, you actually restrict science. For example, even within like Rupert Sheldrake, studied at Cambridge and Harvard, he said that you can't question things in science like telepathy, you can't question things like evolution, and these sorts of things, that there is a general acceptance to such a degree that even like a Chinese biologist said, in our country you can't criticize the state, but you can criticize Darwin. But in your country, you can criticize the state, but you can't criticize Darwin.
Funny thought, yeah.
Which is literally, it actually falls in line directly with what you said, which is it has become like a religion of sorts.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah.
I think that goes back. I think my overarching point is that I think all people have a religious faith, which is non-rational and arrived at because of cultural factors, and that's as true as secular people who don't believe in God as it is of people who believe in God. And like going back to what my perspective is, like I'm not that interested in whether God exists or not. I'm also not that interested in the sort of scientific explanation around how things emerge. I'm never that interested in science. It seems to be very good at working out things, but I find it much more interesting to understand why these communities come up with these ideas and develop these belief systems, and what does it say about the nature of those communities, and what does it say about the differences and the similarities between humanity over time and in different places.
So the sociological.
I guess sociological, yeah. But I think it's also historical. Like it's a question of, take the question of Christianity's influence. Like that is a really important historical question because it helps us explain why things have happened in the West, and tracing a line of consistency from like the ancient Greeks to the early Christians up to the Western world and its Christianity, moving into secularism. Like there's a clear, consistent thread there of ideas. Plato is very influential on Christian theology, and all Abrahamic theology actually. And I find that interesting because I think it shows us how ideas have a causal impact on the world and influence the progression of material factors in society. And I think if you're interested in why we think what we think today and how this world we're in now emerged, then I think that those are the most fruitful answers, and that's why I find that interesting. And I find it more interesting than the question about, I suppose, the actual theological questions over whether or not the literal claims of the Quran or the Torah are true.
I'll tell you why that is important, even in terms of a historical aspect. Because when you're talking about a group of people that are influenced by certain ideas, and then that group of people, or those groups of people, they say that, you know what, we believe in a book, it's unchanged, it comes from God. Naturally, a person becomes intrigued, like, what are those ideas that are in that book? Why is that book preserved? Why is so much effort and energy being expelled in following it to a T, and why not something else? That I think marries and ties in with your point as well. But going back to the previous point, which I found interesting, was then how do you, again this is a personal thing, asking for evidence, but how do you believe and how do you explain how we see all this intelligence and design and the universe and the cosmos around us? How do you rationalize it?
I think lots of explanations. Like one, which could be plausible off the top of my head, is that we're pattern-seeking beings who are designed to spot consistencies and theorise about why they're there, and therefore we do spot consistencies and patterns and design.
And we build on it. Very good point. Well done.
Yeah. But I mean, I'm not that well at that. I'm sure there are more explanations.